Over 100,000 people forced from their homes. In days. That's what we're talking about in Nagorno-Karabakh, the human cost of this thing. And today we're going deep, looking at this crisis, and how Russia, supposedly Armenia's ally, well, how they played a major role in this exodus.
It's complicated for sure, but our main source, Rasmus Canbäck, this investigative journalist, he doesn't hold back. His report, it's called The Story of a Betrayal, and you'll see why.
Yeah, this is more than just a border dispute, right? This is about a whole power shift with huge consequences.
Yeah.
But before we get into it, let's make sure we're all on the same page. Historically speaking, what exactly is Nagorno-Karabakh? Why is it such a geopolitical tinderbox?
Right, it's easy to get lost in the headlines if you don't have that background. Simply put, Nagorno-Karabakh is landlocked, recognized internationally as part of Azerbaijan. But it has a majority Armenian population, and they've wanted independence for a long time. Or unification with Armenia itself.
So a classic case of a region stuck between bigger powers.
Exactly. And for decades, Russia, they've presented themselves as the regional power broker, the so-called peacekeeper. But Canbäck's report and what we've seen happen paints a very different picture of Russia, one that's more about their interests, not peacekeeping.
And that's where Azerbaijan comes in. Can you tell us more about their relationship with Russia? How does that play into this?
Absolutely. Russia and Armenia, long history there. But lately, Azerbaijan has gotten closer to Russia, strategically, especially in military and energy.
And their timing for that was, well, interesting. Didn't they sign some big agreement right before Russia invaded Ukraine?
Yes, just before, actually. Russia and Azerbaijan signed a 43-point agreement, really ramped up their cooperation. And this wasn't just symbolic. Some key parts of it were increased military support from Russia, and this is big joint development of oil and gas fields in the Caspian Sea.
So while most of the world condemned what Russia was doing, Azerbaijan saw an opportunity to solidify that partnership, even with their own citizens seeing Russia as a bigger threat.
Yeah.
Bold move.
A calculated risk, you could say, but it seems to have worked out for them, at least for now. And this brings us to the other part of this, Armenia's own actions. In many ways, they played right into the hands of Azerbaijan and Russia.
Because while Azerbaijan was getting cozy with Russia, Armenia seemed to be doing the opposite, moving closer to the West, which probably didn't make the Kremlin happy.
Not one bit. Canbäck points to a few decisions by Armenia, taken together, a clear shift. And as we'll see, major consequences.
Let's break those down, because understanding this chain of events, that's key to understanding how we got here.
Okay, so first, Armenia's decision to send humanitarian aid to Ukraine right after the invasion. And it wasn't just the act itself, it was Anna Jacobian, the prime minister's wife, going to Kyiv publicly.
A very clear message of solidarity with Ukraine, even if it meant risking Russia's anger.
Exactly. Then, joint military exercises with the United States poured even more fuel on that fire with Russia. And finally, the last straw, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan publicly questioned Russia's commitment to Armenia's security.
Basically, calling out their supposed ally. On the world stage, questioning their reliability. You can almost hear the phone slamming down in the Kremlin.
Oh, absolutely. And with Armenia seemingly turning away from Moscow, Azerbaijan was ready. They'd been waiting for this.
So you have this backdrop of tension, shifting alliances, and then bam, September 19th, Azerbaijan launches this huge offensive into Nagorno-Karabakh. What can you tell us about how this unfolded? How much of a surprise was this?
Well, Canbäck really highlights the speed and the timing of it all as key to Azerbaijan's strategy. It all started around 1:00 p.m. local time, caught a lot of people off guard, including notably European leaders who, expressed deep disappointment, but they didn't have much leverage there. And that timing was unusual because previous escalations, they usually happen early morning or late at night.
So a calculated move. Create chaos. Limit any kind of immediate response, especially from international players.
Seems that way, yeah. And in all the chaos, Russia's response, or lack of response, I guess, was very telling. The EU, they were left just making statements, but Russia, they were busy shaping the narrative in a way that really helped Azerbaijan.
And this is where Russia's betrayal comes in, right? What did that support look like for Azerbaijan?
It was a two-pronged thing. Publicly, Putin had been laying the groundwork, putting the blame on Armenia for the tensions. Even said that Armenia was at fault for recognizing, Azerbaijan's control over Nagorno-Karabakh.
So before the offensive even began, he was already backing away from any responsibility to protect Armenia.
That's right. And then once it was underway, the Russian Foreign Ministry, they were right there with Putin, blamed Armenia for siding with the West, basically said this is what they get. But what's even more telling is what was happening behind the scenes.
Even more to Russia's attempts to control the story.
Yeah.
Beyond the public statements.
Yeah. Leaked documents, Medusa got a hold of them, this independent Russian media outlet, showed direct orders from the Kremlin to state-run media. They were told specifically to blame Armenia for the conflict and downplay or just ignore any Russian involvement.
Wow. Trying to manipulate the information, shield Azerbaijan from criticism. But what about those Russian peacekeepers? The ones who were supposed to be in Nagorno-Karabakh, protecting the Armenian population. What happened there?
That's maybe the most disturbing part of it all. Canbäck, he quotes a lot of first-hand accounts. Armenians fleeing Nagorno-Karabakh. They talk about Russian troops leaving their posts, even telling civilians to run as the Azerbaijani forces were closing in.
So instead of holding the line, doing their job as peacekeepers, they were actually helping to displace these people, enabling the ethnic cleansing.
Hard to see it any other way. And remember that agreement, the one signed under Russian supervision, that led to Nagorno-Karabakh's army being dissolved. It's hard not to see that as, calculated, to weaken Armenia, make them vulnerable.
Create a vacuum that Azerbaijan was ready to fill.
Exactly. And all this is going on. Over 100,000 Armenians forced from their homes. And the Russian peacekeepers, the ones supposed to protect them, they're mostly passive, more worried about getting themselves out than actually protecting anyone. A complete abandonment, a betrayal.
It begs the question, why? Why would Russia let this happen, hand this victory to Azerbaijan, and ruin their relationship with Armenia? It really makes you think about the cynical side of global politics. Why would Russia do this? What did they have to gain by seemingly switching sides and letting this humanitarian crisis happen?
Well, Canbäck's report, it suggests that this wasn't so much Russia choosing Azerbaijan's side as it was them, looking out for number one. Don't forget, this is all happening while Russia's under pressure because of Ukraine. They're isolated, dealing with sanctions, so they need to hold on to whatever alliances they've got left, especially the ones that are, good for them economically, strategically.
So while they might have lost some influence in Nagorno-Karabakh, their relationship with Azerbaijan gives them a different kind of power on the world stage.
Exactly. Think about energy, for instance, that 43-point agreement, the one that brought Russia and Azerbaijan closer. One of the key things there was joint development of those oil and gas fields in the Caspian Sea. This gives Russia access to energy resources they can then, use in their dealings with other countries, especially in Europe.
Which is really interesting because the EU's been trying to rely less on Russian gas, right? Didn't they just open a new pipeline from Azerbaijan into Europe?
Right, and that's what makes this even more interesting. A lot of the gas going through that pipeline, the one that's supposed to make Europe less dependent on Russia, it's actually Russian gas. It's just being rerouted through Azerbaijan. So Russia still has a way into the European energy market. In Azerbaijan, they've got this bargaining chip.
So even as the EU tries to distance themselves from Russia, they're kind of accidentally supporting their energy sector and strengthening those ties with Azerbaijan.
It's a perfect example of how complex these international relations are. You try to do something good, and it ends up having these unintended consequences. And it shows that for countries like Russia and Azerbaijan, what's good for them often comes before any kind of moral obligation or international law.
And what about Armenia? Where does this leave them? Their protector abandoned them. They're facing a stronger, bolder Azerbaijan. And their relationship with Russia is, well, complicated, to say the least.
Yeah, they're in a tough spot, that's for sure. Canbäck argues that because of all this, Armenia has to rely more on the West now, especially for security. And while things have been chilly between Armenia and Russia diplomatically, their economies tell a different story.
Right, because underneath all these political moves, there's still that reality of a very interconnected economy in the region.
Exactly. Think about it. With all the sanctions against Russia, Armenia has become this, transit point for goods that Russia can't get directly anymore. We're talking microchips, semiconductors, all this technology that Russia needs for its military and industry.
So it's almost ironic. Armenia benefits economically from the very sanctions meant to punish Russia.
It's messy, no easy answers. Really shows how unpredictable these geopolitical power plays can be. In the case of Nagorno-Karabakh, we saw how quickly things change, how power can rewrite the rules, and how the people caught in the middle, well, they often pay the price.
It really makes you think. So as we try to wrap our heads around all of this, what are some of the key things you hope our listeners take away from this? What does this whole situation in Nagorno-Karabakh tell us about the world today?
The biggest takeaway for me is that, this international order, this system we have with alliances and treaties and all that is much more fragile than we think, and a lot more self-serving. What happened in Nagorno-Karabakh is a harsh reminder that power often wins out over principle. And these geopolitical games, they have real consequences for real people.
It reminds us to look deeper. Beyond the headlines, question the stories we're being told, especially with these kinds of conflicts. Like we saw, it's rarely simple. There are hidden agendas, power dynamics that shape everything.
Absolutely. And never forget the human cost. Behind all the numbers, the troop movements, the politics, there are people whose lives are being torn apart, their futures uncertain.
That's what we need to remember. If you want to really dig into the Nagorno-Karabakh crisis, definitely read Rasmus Canbäck's full report. It's called The Story of a Betrayal, published in The Insider. It's eye-opening. Shows you how power, betrayal, and self-interest all came together to create this tragedy for the Armenian people of Nagorno-Karabakh.
And as we move forward, let's stay informed. Ask tough questions. And hold those in power accountable, not just to their allies, but to the very idea of peace, of justice, of human dignity.
Well said. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those critical questions. This is The Deep Dive, signing off.